You know, it's almost impossible to truly grasp the paranoid shifting world of the early Roman Empire, that crucial half-century between, say, the death of Augustus and the collapse of Nero.
It's so murky.
Right. And most of what we think we know about those first Caesars comes filtered through one single monumental source.
Exactly. We're talking about that period from AD 14 when Augustus dies, right through to, well, the madness of Nero's later years around AD 68. It is. It's a historical minefield of spin and outright fabrication.
But we have this one incredible flashlight aimed directly at the heart of the imperial court.
We do. The Annals of the Roman historian and senator Tacitus.
And today we are skipping the library and going straight to the core. We are taking a deep dive into Tacitus's final, and I think we can both agree, his greatest work, a text that the historian Ronald Meller called the pinnacle of Roman historical writing.
It absolutely is.
So our mission is to pull out the crucial insights that have shaped our entire view of these figures, Tiberius, Claudius, Nero, and to understand not just what happened, but how Tacitus, a man deep inside the Roman political elite, chose to frame it all for us.
And that's what gives him such unique authority, his position. He wasn't some scholar writing centuries later. He wasn't an outsider. He was a Roman senator himself. He was operating within that system, decades after the events, but he understood the mechanics of it. And this likely meant he had direct, privileged access to the Acta Senatus.
The official Senate records.
The official records, the minutes. That gave him a rock-solid basis for his timelines, for his details. This is, the ancient equivalent of having classified government documents fall into your lap.
That detail is so important. It just elevates his story above, simple court gossip, even when he layers his own famously cynical take on top of it.
Right.
But before we get into the substance, let's clear up something about the title for you, the listener, the Annals.
Ah, yes. That's a modern name. Tacitus didn't call the Annals.
No.
It just got that name from its meticulous year-by-year structure. It reads like a chronicle. The actual manuscript title is far more revealing. It's Ab Accessu Divi Augusti Historiarum Libri.
Which translates to?
Books of History from the Death of the Divine Augustus.
And that shift in title really signals the scale of this project. It's not just a list of years. It's an intellectual study of the moment. Rome transitions from the stability of Augustus, the divine ancestor, into something much more unpredictable.
It immediately sets a tone of gravity of political analysis. For him, the real story, the Principate, the story of the emperors, begins the second Augustus leaves the stage.
It's the moment Rome trades its freedom for peace, and Tacitus is right there tallying up the cost.
Okay, let's unpack this grand project, and we have to deal with the tragedy of its structure first.
Yeah, we do. So when we look at Tacitus's work, you have to see his two major histories as a single continuum. He wrote the histories first, dealing with the year of 4 emperors and the Flavians.
The Annals came last. It was him looking backward to the very beginning of the whole imperial system.
And together, these were an enormous undertaking, a true magnum opus.
Oh, massive. They originally amounted to 30 books in total.
30, wow.
Yeah. The goal was to cover the reigns all the way from Tiberius in AD 14 right through to the death of Domitian in AD 96. I mean, think about that scope. An entire century of imperial rule documented by this one brilliant, cynical mind.
But this is where the tragedy of history preservation kicks in, the half-life of history. Of those 30 books that St. Jerome mentioned, only about half survived.
And the gaps in the Annals specifically, they are devastating. I mean, they leave these massive gaping holes in our historical narrative.
What are we talking about exactly?
Well, the most notorious loss is books 7 through 10, 4 entire books, just gone. And on top of that, we only have bits and pieces of books 5, 6, 11, and 16.
And the loss of book 16 is just infuriating for anyone studying Nero.
Absolutely. It just cuts off. Mid-sentence. In the middle of the year, AD 66. So we completely lose Tacitus's account of the final 2 most chaotic years of Nero's reign, his breakdown, his enforced suicide.
Gone.
We lose his unique senatorial perspective on that ultimate imperial collapse.
It's the worst kind of historical cliffhanger. You're watching this incredible drama unfold, and then the text just stops right before the climax.
And it forces us to lean on sources like Suetonius.
Who is more about the scandalous anecdotes than the deep political analysis.
Exactly. We get the gossip, But we lose Tacitus's sober, critical account. It just vanished.
But even with what's missing, we can still see the brilliance in how he structured it. Let's break that down because it really shows his intent.
It's very deliberate. You can see how he allocated his attention. We start with Tiberius right after Augustus.
And he gets a lot of space.
6 books.
Yeah.
Nearly a third of the whole project. And even here, the structure is telling. Those 6 books are neatly divided into 2 sets of 3.
And that division mirrors a political shift.
A huge one. It basically chronicles the end of Tiberius's public life and the start of his isolated tyranny. The first 3 books are the early years, when he's still trying to manage the Senate, keep up the Augustan facade.
Okay.
The second 3 books, starting around book 4, that's when he retreats from Rome to places like Capri. And you see the rise of his treacherous right-hand man, Sejanus. It's Tacitus saying, here's the functional emperor, now here's the paranoid tyrant.
And then we hit the section on Caligula and Claudius, and this is the historical dark zone.
It really is. That massive gap. Books 7 through 10, completely gone. Think what we lose there? The end of Tiberius's reign, the entire reign of Caligula, all that legendary madness, and the start of Claudius's rule.
So we're left without Tacitus's measured, cynical take on what drove Caligula's madness. We just get the caricature from other sources.
Precisely. The master analyst of power never gets to dissect him for us. What we do have, books 11 and 12, pick up the story with Claudius right around the time of the treachery of his wife, Messalina.
Right through to his death.
Right through to his possibly poisoned death. And then finally we get to Nero.
The infamous Nero.
He gets the final 4 surviving books, starting in AD 54 when he took the throne, and as we said, stopping dead in AD 66. So this whole structure, 6 books for Tiberius's transition, 6 for the chaos of Caligula and Claudius, 4 for Nero's destruction. It shows how committed he was to analyzing the decay of the system.
The structure tells us what he covered, but it's the way he wrote, that deep, cynical tone that really defines the work. Let's pivot to that now, to his style and his underlying thesis.
You're right. The Annals is so much more than a timeline. It's a political treatise. And a deeply critical, almost pessimistic one.
He had a complicated view of the whole system, didn't he?
Very, very nuanced. I mean, he was a senator, part of the old guard, but he wasn't naive. He knew the reality of the situation.
So what was his core take on the emperors? Was he for or against?
Well, his core thesis basically acknowledged that the Principate was necessary. He says Augustus gave and warranted peace after decades of bloody civil war.
You have to remember the context.
Exactly. Nobody wanted to go back to the bloodbath of the late Republic. So in that sense, the emperor was a necessary evil for stability.
That's the pragmatic side of his brain. But then the senatorial emotional side kicks in and he pivots straight to the dark side.
Precisely. That's the contradiction. The Principate might have been necessary for security, but for Tacitus, its history was the history of the end of political freedom, especially for his own class, the senatorial aristocracy.
He is just. He is brutal about his fellow senators. He doesn't let them off the hook at all.
He paints them as complicit in their own demise. He describes the aristocracy as morally decadent, corrupt, and servile towards the emperor. He talks about how they competed not to give the best speech, but to deliver the most flowery, over-the-top flattery.
So it wasn't just that the emperors took power. The Senate just handed it to them.
Eagerly. They lost their backbone. And that's really what he's documenting. The process where real political debate gets replaced by competitive submission. And this context really explains his writing method, what we call the art of portraiture.
So this is less about simple biography and more like forensic psychology.
I think that's a great way to put it. He really refines this style in the Annals. He doesn't just give you a bio of an emperor in chapter 1. He paints them indirectly, progressively.
How so?
He uses these subtle observations, these devastating one-liners, and incidents that accumulate over multiple books to fill in the dark details of a ruler's character.
And his portrait of Tiberius is the masterclass in this, right? The slow-motion psychological decline.
It is masterful. Tiberius is shown as someone who had once been a great man, a capable general, a good administrator, but his character is just slowly eaten away by the paranoia of absolute power. The portrait is built over 6 books, showing his withdrawal, his paranoia, his ultimate descent into tyranny. It's a tragedy of character.
But he doesn't give Nero that same treatment. There's no sense of a tragic fall with Nero.
No, because Tacitus doesn't grant him the dignity of a fall. For Tacitus, Nero is simply despicable from the get-go. He's shallow, cruel, an amateur actor in imperial purple. Tiberius was a tyrant who had a flicker of former greatness. Nero's wickedness is just inherent.
That brings up a really interesting point about resistance. This was the era of the Stoics, of these noble suicides as a form of protest.
Yes, the exodus illustrium virorum, the end of the illustrious men. For many educated Romans, this was the final, definitive act of political protest, a way of refusing to legitimize a tyrannical system.
It was a statement.
It was a grand philosophical statement. But Tacitus, the pragmatist, was actually opposed to this.
Why? Wouldn't he see that as an honorable way out?
He criticized those who chose what he called useless martyrdom through vain suicides. He seems to argue that it was better to survive, to stay in the system and try to exert some influence, rather than make a grand theatrical gesture that achieved nothing practical. It really speaks to his pragmatism.
So if Tacitus is documenting this dark side through these complex portraits, let's use the actual events he recorded to illustrate these themes of tyranny and decline. This can be the listener's guide to the turmoil of the first century, all through his critical lens.
Okay, we start with the Tiberius years. And for Tacitus, this is all about military unrest and deep political treachery right from the start.
His accession in AD 14 was not smooth at all. Book 1 just throws us right into chaos on the frontier.
He does. Tiberius is immediately hit with the mutiny of the Pannonian and German legions. These are massive frontier armies. And the fact they immediately questioned the new emperor exposes how fragile the whole system was.
So instability from day one.
Right out of the gate. And after that, the focus shifts inward to the palace and the rise of Sejanus, the Praetorian prefect.
His story is one of the most compelling parts of the Annals.
It really is. Tacitus details how Sejanus just systematically eliminates his rivals. He even details how Sejanus poisons Drusus, who was Tiberius' own son and heir.
Which shows that the real threat wasn't from outside, it was right there in the palace.
Festering at the very heart of the imperial family. And as this treachery grows, Tiberius just leaves. He abandons Rome for Campania.
And that's the turning point.
That's the definitive shift. The emperor is gone, and he's reeling through ruthless subordinates like Sejanus. The mask of the Augustan Principate really starts to slip.
Okay, shifting to the Claudius years. We're relying on the fragments we have, but what are the big themes?
It's this balance of major imperial expansion and an intense, almost farcical palace intrigue. We get the incredibly scandalous story of the treachery of Messalina, Claudius's wife.
She staged a fake marriage while he was away.
Supposedly, yes. Her execution is a prime example of just how volatile and dangerous court life was. But at the same time, this wasn't all just scandal.
Right, there were major state projects happening.
Absolutely. Book 12 documents Claudius adopting Nero, which Tacitus sees as a disastrously foolish decision in hindsight, and the enlargement of the Primarium, Rome's sacred boundary.
A symbol of strength.
A huge symbol of strength. And this is happening alongside the continued invasion of Britain, with campaigns against leaders like Caradicus. Rome is expanding.
And it wraps up with that massive engineering project.
The draining of Fucine Lake. An incredible feat. 30,000 workers, years of labor. It's a reminder that even while Claudius was being consumed by domestic chaos, the imperial machine was still capable of these huge undertakings.
And that brings us to the Nero years. Madness, cruelty, and disaster. This is the part of the Annals everyone knows.
And Tacitus makes sure Nero's reputation is well-deserved. Books 13 and 14 chronicle these shocking family murders. First, Britannicus, his rival, is poisoned. Then he murders his own mother, Agrippina.
He even tried to kill her with a collapsible boat, right?
He did. It's almost theatrical in its cruelty. And while this is happening, he's trying to build his cultural legacy, creating the Neronia Festival. But crises are erupting elsewhere.
This is where Boudica comes in.
Exactly. The catastrophic revolt in Britain, led by Queen Boudica. Tacitus's account of that revolt, the sheer brutality of it, is one of our most vital sources for that conflict.
But the real climax, the source of his eternal infamy, is the Great Fire in Book 15.
The Great Fire of Rome in AD 64, a defining moment. And Tacitus gives us the essential account. He details the devastation and, importantly, his own skepticism about the rumors that Nero started it.
So, if Tacitus himself is skeptical, how can we trust his account? Isn't there a risk this is just more anti-emperor propaganda?
That's a critical question. Tacitus is definitely biased, but his genius is in his nuance. He says he doesn't believe Nero was playing the liar, but he immediately pivots to Nero's actions after the fire, which were a political disaster.
And what disaster are we talking about here?
The scapegoating of the Christians. Tacitus's text gives us one of the earliest non-Christian references to this group. He describes in horrific detail how they were tortured, dressed in animal skins and torn apart by dogs, or set on fire to light up the imperial gardens.
So Nero used them to deflect blame.
Exactly. He used a despised, marginal group as a political shield. And right after that comes the Bythonian conspiracy,
A failed plot to overthrow him.
a massive but failed plot, which leads to this devastating wave of executions and forced suicides. And as the Annals cuts off in Book 16, Nero's paranoia is targeting his intellectual opponents, the Stoics.
The last thing we read is him plotting against philosophers.
Yes, the work stops right as the terror intensifies, leaving us with this image of a government completely consumed by paranoia. It's an undeniable narrative of corruption and tyranny.
Given how powerful the Annals is, you assume it was always accepted as Tacitus's work. But its journey through time is a whole other story.
It really is.
Yeah.
Here's where we get to the surprising part. For a long time, there were these persistent, sometimes radical challenges to its authorship.
Starting when?
Well, you had thinkers like Voltaire back in the 18th century questioning his historical standards. And Voltaire's criticism sort of opened the door for others.
Paved the way for an even more radical idea, the forgery claim.
This was the extreme hypothesis, as scholars call it, put forward by guys like John Wilson Ross in 1878 and Polydore Hochart in 1890.
Wait, what did they propose? That the entire thing was a modern hoax?
Essentially, yes. They claimed the whole of the surviving annals was a clever fake, forged by the famous Italian scholar Poggio Bracciolini during the Renaissance.
That's astonishing, suggesting one of our most critical sources on Rome is a Renaissance invention. But modern scholars completely dismiss this.
Completely, and the evidence that disproves it is compelling. This is the aha moment for you, the listener.
So what's the proof?
It all comes down to the provenance of the manuscripts, where they were found and when. The two halves of the annals were discovered at different times at different places, and crucially, we have proof they were being used before Bracciolini, the supposed forger, was even born.
Okay, let's start with the second half, books 11-16.
That section was likely discovered much earlier at the monastery of Monte Cassino in Italy, and we know for a fact that Giovanni Boccaccio used it.
The author of the Decameron.
The very same. Boccaccio lived from 1313 to 1375, decades before Bracciolini.
So how do we know for sure he used it?
This is the definitive knockout punch. Around 1374, Boccaccio wrote his Commento di Dante. In it, he gives a detailed account of the death of the philosopher Seneca. That account is drawn directly from Annals, Book 15.
So Bracciolini couldn't have forged a text that was already being quoted a generation before he was working.
He simply couldn't have. And then there's the second piece of evidence, the other half of the book.
Books 1-6.
Exactly.
Yeah.
While the second half came from Italy, the first half was found much later, in 1508, at Corvey Abbey, deep in Germany.
So a forger would have had to plant perfect, fragmented fakes hundreds of miles apart to be found 150 years apart by different people.
It's impossible. The two manuscript streams, separated by geography and time, fit together perfectly. It confirms they were both genuine surviving parts of the original.
That story of survival is incredible, but let's bring it forward. Why does this ancient, fragmented, cynical history still resonate so deeply today?
Because its themes, the corrosion of power, the failure of the elite, the psychology of a tyrant, they're timeless. It's a source book for modern political morality tales.
And we see direct references to it in modern literature.
Oh, absolutely. Think about Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita. The Annals is referenced specifically about the mention of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. A character claims that part is a later addition, not by Tacitus. It becomes a symbol of contested historical truth.
It even pops up in Jorge Luis Borges.
In The Garden of Working Paths, yes. A character is seen reading the Annals on a train. It's used as a symbol of deep, complex, labyrinthine history. It appears in crime fiction, in Gothic novels. Its psychological depth just transcends genre.
It seems like the Annals has survived not just as a record of Rome, but as a blueprint for understanding failed states and corrupt leadership.
It truly is a masterful work, even broken as it is. It provides these psychological profiles of tyrants that have just echoed through Western culture for millennia.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner? I think the significance is clear. The Annals isn't just a collection of dates and battles. It's Tacitus's profound, skeptical analysis of how absolute power corrupts.
And how the Roman elite let it happen. He cemented this view that the transition from republic to empire, while it brought peace, was a moral and political tragedy for the ruling class.
Its enduring value is that focus on motive and character. Tacitus helps us understand why the wheels came off so quickly after Augustus.
And he places the blame squarely on the moral decay of both the rulers and the people they ruled.
So here's a final provocative thought for you to carry forward, and it ties directly into the fragmented nature of the text. Just consider that massive, devastating loss of books 7, 8, 9, and 10, the books that covered the entire reign of Caligula.
The fact that it's so fragmented forces us to rely almost entirely on his damning portraits of Tiberius and Nero, because those are the detailed narratives that survived. We're viewing this whole First Dynasty through a very specific and possibly skewed window.
How much more nuanced, or maybe even how much darker, would our view of Caligula and Claudius be if those missing books were still waiting, forgotten in some abbey library?
The Annals teaches us that history is often defined not just by what survives, but by what we've lost, and how that loss forever shapes the villains and heroes we think we know. It really makes you wonder what other ancient truths might still be out there, waiting to reshape our understanding of the past.